The wound is where the blessing is.
And why, as wounded healers, we show up every day and witness the pain and the healing of others.
We are shaped by our history.
We are here because our ancestors made it.
I mean, weird stuff happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you get that.
We are here because they are the lineage of survivors.
These mysteries are there waiting for us, these mysteries of meaning.
What I tell everybody is to not just channel the intergenerational trauma, but channel the intergenerational.
Welcome back to the Boundless Body. So check this out. 63.5% of you who are regular listeners haven't subscribed yet to the show. So please take a moment. It would be really helpful to click subscribe. It's free of charge. It will really help us out. In turn, we'll help you out by bringing you better and better content. Along those lines, send us an email with your feedback, boundlessbodypod@gmail.com. Send us your feedback about how you think we can do better. Give us questions to address on the show, interviewees you'd like us to interview. It'd be super helpful.
Hey, Karen, welcome to the Boundless Body podcast.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Really good to have you here. So we're going to talk about intergenerational trauma and some other things. Really excited to chat with you about it. So I'm going to start out as usual with your bio. Karen Goldenberg, LMFT, is the founder and clinical director of Sunray Psychotherapy, a private practice dedicated to helping individuals and professionals navigate complex trauma, intergenerational wounds, and the challenges of perfectionists with a high inner critic. And there's me searching the research, I'm imagining, hey?
Yes. I joke that everything I work on, everything I research is just, it's me.
Yep, there's always me search in the research. So as a licensed psychotherapist, supervisor, and business owner, Karen brings both depth and practicality to the therapeutic space. And Karen is also engaged in doing her doctoral dissertation. And if you could just tell us a little bit about what got you lit up about intergenerational trauma and complex PTSD. If you could just start off, and by way of continuing the thread of me searching the research, I'm imagining we're going to encounter some personal story here.
Yeah. So just as any good therapist, I have had my share of wounding. So a wounded healer through and through. And when I was about 20 years old, I was really depressed and I was feeling guilty about my own depression because I just couldn't understand where it's stemming from. I'm studying psychology, a good psych student, diagnosing myself left and right, and was doing a project for one of my classes. And I'm like, why am I depressed when my ancestors, they had it so hard? And they lived in such a harsh environment and harsh reality, and they were fine. And that's when I started digging into that a little bit more and learned what intergenerational trauma was and saw like that was not covered at all in school. It actually was not even covered in my master's program at all. And just like getting into it and learning about it more and more about how trauma is inherited was very fascinating to me and was my aha moment and an explanation of why I was so down and not feeling so great. And then when it comes to complex trauma, what I see in a lot of clients is that they come in and they say that they don't have any trauma. For most of them, they're just coming in with a little bit of anxiety. They're coming in with perfectionism. They're coming in with marital issues. And then when we really start digging, we see complex trauma. So with that, it's like, it's not the big T. It's not the obvious. It's little hardships that happen throughout a person's life that lead them to essentially be in survival mode now. And because I'm so psychodynamic, I just love that so much. And it's like giving other people their own aha moment, whether it's through exploring their upbringing, their childhoods, or going down to their parents' generation or their grandparents' generation and seeing both the familial and the collective trauma that they inherited and how that impacts their day-to-day life. That is just fascinating for me in general, and also it speaks true to my life and my life experience. So when they come in and they're a type A person who's high achieving and they're struggling and not understanding why they're struggling because they have everything that they have ever wanted. And then I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about your middle school years, and let's talk about your parents, and let's talk about the lives of your grandparents and how that all intersects and comes together, is really powerful.
Mhm. So you're immersed in your literature review, among other things. So you're
Yes.
staying abreast of the recent literature. Do you go into some of the epigenetic
Yeah.
elements of this stuff? Yeah.
Yes. So the epigenetic stuff is probably one of my favorite, because I think in some circles, when I say I specialize in intergenerational trauma or I study intergenerational trauma, people look at me like I'm crazy. I was recently sharing with some random, like, my husband's dad's friends about this, and he was like, "That makes no sense. Like, is this scientifically backed?" And I'm like, "Yes." That's called
Yeah.
epigenetics. I would say epigenetics are probably the hardest for my psychology, non-biology brain to write about, because there's like
Mm,
the F1 and the 0 and all of that
mm.
language. But in simple terms, because I did try to find easy ways to explain it, it's basically like you have your DNA structure, and there are little messages on there from the people that came beforehand. So, like, when we feel afraid, we run. When there is no food, we hoard. And it's like essentially like warning signs from our DNA that, okay, like, this is what happened in this lifetime, and we need to warn the next generation about it. We can't just communicate that to them. You can't from parent to offspring, but gets like placed on the DNA. And
Yeah.
yeah,
So for those science geeks out there, what Karen is referring to are called histone modifications. Oh,
that.
yeah. And it's quite interesting, right? Because the research shows that the impacts are quite non-linear, in the sense that you might expect that a prior generation going through a famine or something, that it would be some maybe cookie cutter thing where maybe we could expect things like obesity downstream from that. And that's the case sometimes, but other times we see increased risk of depression. We
Yeah.
see, so what I'm saying is there's like that's an interesting nonlinear element. There's these histone modifications which essentially flag whether the DNA is likely to be read or not read. So when
Yeah.
DNA coil is coiled up, it can't really be read out. But when it's uncoiled, it can be read and transcribed and so on for proteins to be made. What we see in epigenetics, right, is there all this kind of interesting non-linear, like if your paternal grandfather was in a famine and you're a woman, then you have an increased risk of obesity, for example, or increased risk of diabetes. But if you're a man and was your paternal grandmother, then and she also went through a famine, then you're going to you're going to get an entirely different set of histone modifications and so on. So the field is really kind of in its infancy. I'm imagining you've run into Rachel Yeshuda's work.
Yes. She is being cited in my lit review a lot. I would say like most of the most relevant research that I found was her, as well as some of the colleagues that she writes with. I can't think of names at the top of my head, but Rachel is great because I think she's one of the pioneers, honestly. And also, if you look at like the layman person's book, like It Didn't Start With You.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Like he also cites Yehuda. So
what's that dude's name again?
Mark Wallen.
That's right.
I think.
Yeah, and just for those of you out there that want like a concrete image of epigenetics and epigenetics research, I like to quote Randy Girdle. He's one of the early Duke professors, I believe. I think he was out of Duke, where they had bred over many, many, many generations these particular types of mice to die of the things that a lot of humans die of, which is cardiovascular disease and cancer. And so for many, many generations, they bred these mice, and the mice essentially came to be overweight, and it was in the genetics, right? That's why they had bred these mice. They had an orange coat, and they were obese, and they tended to die of the things that a lot of humans die of, heart disease and cancer. And so what Girdle decided to do is essentially inject kale juice into the mother, and what he found is that out came these brown coated, sleek, not underweight mice, but just kind of like regular weight mice.
Wow.
And he was like, what the hell's happening here? Like this, it's already in the cookbook. It's already in the DNA. So how's it even possible that after so many generations that a brown, sleek looking mouse is going to come out, and just because of kale juice? And this is one of the big moments in epigenetics, because it's like, you can't really argue that it's not in the DNA.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, so this is one of I love sharing this with students because it doesn't feel abstract. And it's not like talking about peppermint exposure to mice over generations, stuff like that. It's very concrete that, no, this is not in the cookbooks. It's in the epigenetic tagging. And look at that.
Yeah. It's really fascinating because the epigenetic markers can also like appear differently in different people. Like something needs to trigger it oftentimes, right? So that can be just typical life stressors, which is, I think, what I see most in my work. But then there's also like the same things happening to the person. Like, wow, okay, so my grandma went through that, then my mom went through that, and now I'm going through that. And it just hits the person so much stronger because it's more of a re-triggering of that traumatic experience from the previous generation.
When I'm writing, I use the metaphor of a Post-it note. Like that histone modification is like a Post-it note.
Yes.
And the prior generations are laying those Post-it notes, sending the message in a bottle or whatever downstream, saying, pay attention.
Yeah.
And then when that trigger comes, then that piece of DNA uncoils and it's ready to be read. But it's sensitive, right? It's a Post-it note that's like, okay, if something like this happens, like, warning. Yeah, for sure. Tell us about a bit about your research, because it's about, Russian-speaking Jews, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I am studying the intergenerational impact of Soviet anti-Semitism. So, heavy subject.
Yeah.
And so basically I am looking at, so some of my literature reviews focused around the dry history of Jewry in the Soviet Union, but mostly what I hope to be looking for in my actual research question is I want to see how the first generation Americans here are impacted by the stories and the epigenetics of what happened to their parents, their grandparents, their great grandparents. Because Soviet Jewry, it was like it's a compounded history. So you have like the early 1900s with the pogroms. And then you have 1930s, 1940s, you have the Holocaust. Then after the Holocaust, you have just still hatred towards Jews, discrimination, not letting them go to university without a bribe or having a higher score. There was institutionalized anti-Semitism and folk anti-Semitism. Like my grandpa was a butcher, wasn't an educated man. He would just be spat on and called a dirty Jew at work every single day. He works in the market. People would pass by, say slurs. My other grandfather basically had to sell his life away in order to go to university. He had to sign a contract that he's going to work for the company that sponsored him. And that was just like generation after generation. My mom was cool and popular, so she was considered a quote unquote good Jew. She wasn't like the other bad Jews. My great grandmother would always tell my grandmother, you always have to look 100% presentable, always have your hair brushed, always look nice, because you're already going to be called a Jew. You don't want to be labeled a dirty Jew. So really heavy history and what you hear from a lot of people in the community. And then you come over here and you see the first generation Americans are, for the most part, not everybody, striving towards higher education, have successful careers, striving towards a successful careers, different nuances of an overcompensating, show off the behavior. So stereotypically, like I know some guys are like, well, I wouldn't date a Russian Jewish girl. They're high maintenance. So what I'm looking at is basically like, okay, what is this high maintenance? What is this strive to success? Why is it so strong in our immigrant population? And I really think it's because over there we were nothing. And our parents came here for the American dream, for us to have a better life. And we're over here being perfectionists, trying to kill ourselves to really achieve what was not possible to achieve in the Soviet Union. And this is like generally speaking, it's not black.
Well, yeah. And it's kind of what the thought comes to mind. It's like, well, it's traumatizing enough to be in Soviet Russia where, my wife grew up in Soviet Russia.
Yeah.
And like, for example, they had dental work without any anesthetics.
Wow.
And so you have right? I get the chills just kind of thinking about it. It's like, okay, let's get that kid on the dental chair and not give them any anesthetics and start pulling stuff and start drilling. And even just that much.
Yeah.
Even just that much, aside from the prior other horrors, and it's kind of challenging to cut up, like, because also trauma is contagious.
Mm-hmm.
As well. I like to think it's contagious. Is that in the research? Well, through the epigenetics, we could make a case that it's contagious, but like, how does it jump across people? It's easy to see clinically and even just intuitively, somebody walks in a room that's heavily traumatized and people just start, kind of scratching.
It's vicarious trauma. We can say that, the Jungians, I had one class, I don't remember who it was exactly that said that. Might have been the late Lionel Corbett, but science will catch up to depth psychologies eventually.
Yeah. Well, one of the classics that well, I don't know what constitutes a classic. A classic in my book, on my bookshelf back there, is The Inner World of Trauma by Kalshad. Because that's one of the unique.
Yes,
Yeah.
I have that book downloaded. I looked through, I would say probably like 10% of it.
Yeah. It's cool because it's this psychodynamic approach to trauma. And I really like how he explores that trauma is like, right, and is analogous to an autoimmune disorder
Yeah.
in the sense that we have these defensive systems that just get engaged because of these epigenetic dynamics and other dynamic where we're oversensitized
Yeah.
to certain things because of intergenerational trauma or because of trauma. And similar to an autoimmune disorder in the body, the defense systems get all out of whack
An attack.
and attack the healthy tissue.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. I don't think it's really even a metaphor. I think it's analogy. I think it's, and we could even say that we could even be literal with this stuff, that intergenerational trauma and trauma create an inflammatory organism, like human organ, the brain and the body.
It does.
Yeah.
There's actually links between trauma and inflammation. I'm sure there is. But even anxiety, when people are anxious, their whole body gets inflamed. Stomach problems, sweaty glands, right? Like there is a direct, and a lot of anxiety is really just triggers of trauma.
So I don't know, maybe you could orient, because a lot of American listeners are pretty unaware. Yeah, I mean, and I'll speak for myself. Like before I got married to a Russian, I really had no idea of the Russians' role in the world wars and how profound of a load the Russians carried on the international level. And I had no clue because I grew up in an American school system. I had no sense of the burden and the trauma load that Russians carry. So, and then sitting on top of that, you have the Russian Jewish trauma that you're focusing on that aspect. But I'm wondering if you could if we could zoom out and maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I can definitely speak a little bit about it, probably not a whole lot because my research is not really focused on that. But like even growing up around other Soviet Jews, like they have Victory Day because the Soviets really believed that they won World War II. And the Soviet, like my great grandfather fought in the war as a Jew against the Nazis. It was kind of like multi-layered. There would be some people that got sent away on an evacuation. So those would be like considered status 2 Holocaust survivors. But then there were people that were drafted and were fighting. In World War II, like Germany, they came into a lot of towns in Ukraine, and there was like a massacre in a Ukrainian town, and they came in also like where my ancestors are from, the little town called Berdichev. My great grandmother was in evacuation. She was sent to Mongolia, or I believe, and when she came back, everybody was dead. And like Russia had a very strategic plan because basically like the Germans came into Russia and it was so cold, and like that was one of the reasons that they didn't do well, was because of that.
And the Russians had really good boots.
Yeah, because they're used to they were used to the cold.
Wow. So your great grandfather was in the war, and I just hard to imagine, like, getting home from work, the war, and like being called a dirty Jew, right? Just like,
yeah, it was. I don't know what was worse, the being like in the soldier or being sent away in an evacuation, because like my great grandmother, who I'm very close to, she was sent away to Siberia, and like when I was around maybe 6 or 8 or before 10, like elementary school ages. Like she told me like, yeah, when the Nazis came, I like hid under potatoes.
Wow. Yeah.
Just their stories are so rich and tragic. And yeah, that's why I was like, I was 20 years old reminiscing on my childhood and hearing these stories. And what do I have to be depressed about?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good segue into perhaps sharing some, by way of me searching the research, what epigenetic elements you think you inherited based on, your own path of suffering and the wounded healer archetype and all of that.
So I made the analogy. This is just my own research, my own clinical work, my own observation. Imposter syndrome. I really struggle with that, like not being good enough. Everything that I have achieved not feeling real. Like I'm a fraud. Even this morning, I'm like, I'm not gonna know anything that I'm gonna talk about. I'm just gonna embarrass myself. And so that high inner critic is so grand. So I think it's just generations of my ancestors being told that they are nothing, they're not good enough. And even here, with everything that I have accomplished and worked so hard towards, it feels fraudulent. It feels like I am not deserving of that because like everybody over there said, like you are nothing. If you want to get somewhere, you need to bribe. If you want to get somewhere, you need to sell your life away. I think that is very much present in me. I see it in my clientele. I see it in my sister also, who's very successful in what she does and still feels that imposter syndrome. So I really think that stems from it because we're in an unfamiliar territory. If we're looking at perfectionism at its core, perfectionism is not the strive for success. It is the fear of failure.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you look at like the hero's journey and perfectionism, the hero is trying to achieve that perfection that is just unattainable. And as both Jung and then Marianne Woodman later elaborated on, perfection belongs to the god. Completeness and wholeness is the most a human can hope for. I feel that fear of failure is so strong because this happened like 4 or 5 years ago. Was my first quarter of my PhD program. And I'm sitting in bed, sobbing, crying because I'm having a hard time. Like, why am I doing this? I just kept asking myself, like, why? Why did I get myself into this?
And you were pregnant, yeah?
No, not then.
That was later.
Yeah, that was later.
Uh-huh.
Oh, I have more stuff about the pregnancy and how all of that just accumulates, and I'll share about that in a bit. But it was just like, oh, this was like before my wedding too. But I'm like, why am I putting myself in debt, putting myself 3 years more of school? Like, I legitimately don't need this. I'm already a therapist. What is this for? And then there was like the voice inside my head said to make everything worth it. So it's that my parents escaped, and then we also, like, I moved to the US as a child, and we tore the family apart. And like, if I don't amount to anything, if I don't do the most, then what if it's not worth it? What if all of that hardship was for nothing? So I think that's how it shows up. I don't know. I'm also like very anxious. And if we're talking about like maternal stuff, my grandmother was losing her mother when she was pregnant with my mom. And when she's pregnant with my mom, she's carrying the eggs.
Yeah.
And so, like, no wonder I am so anxious. And then, yeah, being pregnant last year, also like PhD clinical work, listening to people's trauma stories. I had some tragic interpersonal conflict, and that was actually some anti-Semitism towards me while I was pregnant with my daughter. So it's like, it's just the link between that mother, daughter, the eggs. You're like, I was carrying my grandchildren. So I'm literally writing about the intergenerational impact of anti-Semitism. And I am getting attacked for my religion and my identity while pregnant with a daughter who's carrying eggs. So it's just kind of wild. All of that combined, it's non-linear, and it's impossible to label it as linear. I just kind of call it a spider web. It's all interconnected.
Yeah. Because, at least from the biological standpoint here, cortisol does cross the maternal placental barrier.
Yes.
And this is where Yeshuda's work comes in, because you have these epigenetic, Post-it notes all over the cortisol system.
Mm-hmm.
And, cortisol, if there's too much of it, is in essence toxic to the developing brain.
Yeah.
If you have too much cortisol, it's just not the right growth environment for a brain to grow in.
Yeah. And it impacts so many other things.
Yeah.
It's like stress in our brain, but also everything else, and hormones. And I mean, I think cortisol is a hormone, right?
It is correct. It is. Yep. And then you have this dynamic also called cortisol sensitization, where, cortisol's job, just like if you get an injury to a shoulder or something like that, you get an injection, cortisone injection to reduce inflammation. So its job is to reduce inflammation. But if you have too much stress over generations, you have all these epigenetic tags around the cortisol receptor system developing in the brain and so on. The brain and the body gets used to cortisol, so it can't reduce inflammation.
Yeah.
And not efficiently, and therefore you have inflammation, autoimmune disorders, and so on. I just wanted to put in a plug for one of the episodes I did earlier with Loretta Bruning. And she talks about this from a mammal perspective. She calls it status anxiety. And status anxiety is basically, it's really revealing research that we actually get a hit of serotonin, like subjectively pleasing chemical cocktail when we step up a rung in the ladder of the social hierarchy.
Oh, I believe that. Yeah.
For sure, right? Because the whole plumbing, because I want to talk about archetypes with you, because you're into archetypes research. I'm into archetypes research. Yay, archetypes. But archetypes have been sort of underemphasized, and Jung has kind of gone out of vogue a fair bit, and some of these great researchers like Eliade and so on, because there's been this, and rightfully so, concern for the sovereignty of individual tribal identities and ethnic and religious identities, so that focusing on the similarities in the apparent differences has kind of come out of vogue. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think it's just super important from a human perspective. So let's see if we can tease apart or, articulate together how much you think this imposter syndrome stuff is archetypal, i.e. the status anxiety that we have as a species.
Yeah. 100%.
Versus how much of it could be, in Henderson's terms, a cultural unconscious.
Yes.
Because that's one of the frameworks for what you're up to. Like, maybe you could talk about Henderson, or just like talk about cultural unconscious and what that means.
The cultural unconscious, so the collective unconscious is basically like, we are all kind of aware unconsciously of different things that are going on. And I think that's just like, basically, like, that is probably basic DNA, right? We all kind of, we know we have instincts, and there's intuition, I think, is part of the collective unconscious. And then cultural unconscious, that stems from the collective trauma that a culture or a people experience, but it also stems from the rituals, the stories, the language, the traditions, the mythology of that culture. If in my research, what is showing up, because I'm specifically looking at like Russian Jews, but there is also like Jews from other regions, and everybody has the same Torah. Everybody has the same rituals. They might be in slightly different languages, whether it was Yiddish or Ladino, but everybody has the same rituals, even like lighting Friday night Shabbat candles. It's just something that you do, and that collectivity adds to the collective unconscious. In the recent years, when I've been talking to different people, everybody has been praying about the same things on Friday night. Even people who were not lighting candles prior and recently started, that's what people started to do. Without talking to each other, people, in order to connect with the increase of anti-Semitism and other factors going on worldwide, people started lighting candles. So to me, that's part of the collective unconscious. It's like, that's what unconsciously and biologically we were all pulled to do.
The collective unconscious, Jung called it the objective psyche, or, Anthony Stevens came in later and added a scientific, anthropological or archaeological, or maybe even better to say ethological, for those folks out there that like these fancy words. And the unfalsified voice of nature, in other words, the phylogenetic psyche, the ancient language that we inherit from other mammals and other creatures from time out of mind. And status anxiety would be a great contender for something that is in the collective unconscious.
Yeah.
Right? Because, it's a big problem if, like, for example, after the eruption of Mount Toba, in Sumatra 75,000 years ago, it'd be a big deal if you didn't have a tribe around you to help you and support you, and you didn't have some status within that tribe.
Yeah.
Or you didn't have some status to enter in that tribe to like figure out how you're going to get your reindeer fat for the day or whatever it is that you're eating, right?
Yeah.
So there's status anxiety. I think, if we go with Loretta, it comes in with the territory, it comes in the collective unconscious. But then you also have these different cultural enclaves, the cultural unconscious a la Joseph Henderson. That is his name, right? Joseph Henderson? Is that his first name?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah. Henderson was a great writer on the topic of the cultural unconscious, where you have these different ways of navigating the givens, the priors. You have the stories, you have the rituals, you have, this kind of set of unspoken, implicit images and tales. Like, for example, a Russian is just going to know who Baba Yaga is.
Yeah.
A Russian speaker is just going to know who Baba Yaga is. Whereas you connect with the average American on the street or English speaker in American streets, they're just not going to know who Baba Yaga is. So maybe you could tell us who Baba Yaga is and how it might be relevant for, your research and, the Russian psyche as distinct and not separate from, the Jewish tradition, how they might interlock and stories and so on.
When I was at Pacifica in my in my coursework, we did cover some Baba Yaga stuff, but I don't know, I never really thought of bringing it into my research, but I think it might be a really interesting plot point. But yeah, Baba Yaga is basically like the Soviet witch. And I think when I say witch, can you describe what it looks like? Whoa, I just had an epiphany. the Russian Baba Yaga has like big nose, very short. I think it's like the stereotype of a
Because she's a
Jew.
dirty witch, right?
Yeah. Oh my
And
God.
that fits the collective unconscious projections about witch and burn the witch at the stake and Baba Yaga eats
Yes.
babies. Yeah, she's got a
Yeah.
big nose.
Mhm.
Oh, wow. And the folk
Wow.
tradition, I think there's all these projections about witchcraft and how it's demonic and bad and dirty and satanic. And
Yeah. It's basically the witch of all the fairy tales, but it's like so much darker, I think, than the average American witch. I don't know. Maybe the American witch is more cutesy versus
yeah, like in The Wizard of Oz, you have this sense that the Wicked Witch is wicked, and that's getting recast in the modern imagination now in these new Wicked films and everything. But yeah, there really is a sense that, Baba Yaga, she lives in the forest and it's dark and you sort of,
Mhm.
I mean, as you see, if you kind of get deep into Baba Yaga folk tales, there is a sense where she carries this sort of deep neutrality, as this agent of the mystery of life,
Yeah.
so you have Vasilisa the Beautiful, Vasilisa the Wise, given tasks by her evil, wicked somebody like stepmother or something like that. And it's like an impossible task, as you see in Cinderella and stuff in other tales. And in order to like achieve the task, she needs to encounter Baba Yaga to get a boon, to get like the gift.
Yeah.
Right. And Baba Yaga also gives her these impossible tasks that she's going to basically kill Vasilisa if she can't achieve these tasks. But since she does achieve the task, she's given the boon. And because Baba Yaga has this weird sort of integrity.
Yeah, it seems like Baba Yaga is sort of like the dark force roadblock that is there in these fairy tales. It's like, I need to fight this force. But this force is really like a short grandmother who's not very nice.
And she wants to keep the house immaculate.
Yeah.
That's one of the things about Baba Yaga. It's like if you walk into Baba Yaga's kitchen and you start making a mess, you're screwed. And what does that tell you about the Russian psyche?
That just sounds like every single one of us. What I was saying, high maintenance Russian Jewish women. We all embody that. But yeah, it's like, but Baba Yaga, we can talk about it as like a shadow part. Even like imposter syndrome and what you said, like status anxiety. I think the ego wants the status. The persona wants to play the role of that status, and then the shadow comes in and says, I'm not deserving of that. And that's where the status anxiety kind of arises from.
That's interesting. And then how that interlocks with this cultural unconscious that you're researching, how that and your own experience of that, just like nothing is good enough. The ego is searching for that next hit.
The ego wants that proof. The ego wants the status. The ego really is like, this is who I am and this is what I want. And then all of the other parts that come into play are like fighting it. I actually created a free journaling guide. It's on my website. If you go on sunraypsychotherapy.com under goodies and guides, click free journal. I created like a journaling prompt that kind of goes through the ego, the persona, the self with a capital S, and the shadow, and an integration section on just like an easy way to start dipping your toes into some of this work and see how it's relevant to each person, essentially.
What are some of the threads that you pick up in your writing as you write about intergenerational trauma? Are there archetypes or images that are salient that we could pluck on right now? Like, stories that you've drawn from tradition or from the Jungian tradition or the Russian Jewish traditions?
Yeah. A big thread, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's an archetype, but it could be envy.
Oh, yes. Great. Finally, somebody talking about envy. I do this informal research with graduate psychology students that I teach. And I say, I've been doing this for 5-6 years. Raise your hand if you've talked about envy in graduate level psychology school. And
Yeah.
I've had like maybe 4 hands go up in 5 or 6 years,
Yeah.
which is just insane.
Yeah, so I just quickly looked up which archetype envy would be, and it's the shadow, which is what I expected, which is kind of what I've been writing about, but it also talks about the trickster.
Well, yeah, the negative
The
trickster.
green-eyed monster, which is a
that's
cultural
interesting.
archetype.
Well, also, I think it fits quite well with this ongoing discussion that we've had today about status anxiety, imposter syndrome. To me, envy is the plumbing of social media.
Yeah.
It is the shadow plumbing that is just like systemic in the social media juggernaut. Like it's like I've noticed I can turn on social media and be envious within a half a second.
And this is aside from my doctoral research. This is more of like what I've seen with both myself and clients. I always tell people to lean into the envy as a compass to what they want. Because if you are envious of something or someone, that's your unconscious trying to tell you that that's what you really want and that's what you need to strive towards. It's not always possible, but if it's not that exact thing, it's like, well, what does that symbolize? And then go towards that using it as a compass. But either Lenin or Stalin, I can't. It's in my manuscript.
Yeah, one of those brutalist motherfuckers in the
It's one of
Russian.
them. One of them. I believe it is Stalin. But do you know? No, now I feel like I need to tell you exactly which one it is. It's okay. Doesn't matter. I think it's Stalin. It might be Lenin. I don't know. But the reason that he hated Jews, do you want to guess what it was?
Tell me.
Because his father was a shoemaker, and his number one competitor in town was a Jew.
Yep. I mean, that clock. So then we have the psychodynamics of envy, which is radically underrepresented. I'm imagining you've run into the text by the Ulanovs, Cinderella and Her Sisters.
Oh, I mean, I know that, but not academically.
Okay, so it's one of the best treatments on envy, psychodynamics of envy that's out there. It's just an extraordinary text, and Robert Moore, who's one of these very powerful archetypal writers. He wrote, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, and so on, and later repackaged it as royal rather than just being gendered king. He writes a lot about the relationship between idealization and evil, and that envy has everything to do with idealization.
Yes.
So then you have both negative idealization processes and positive idealization processes. But essentially what Moore and what the Ulanovs assert here is that envy has to do with idealization processes.
Yeah.
So that we go onto social media or something like that, or, maybe it's some, Stalin or Lenin or whatever it is. Our envy is archetypal, so therefore it's not a question of, do you have envy? It's how is the envy organized towards whom and in what cases? And is it involving negative idealization or positive idealization? Okay. So, and these ideals, okay, are not achievable, but everything gets polished so well on social media, for example, that it becomes not even achievable. And then same thing with negative idealization, which is, and it's just the roots of genocide, right? Is negative idealization.
Yeah.
And envy has a way of kind of infiltrating and getting into this weird, just distorting minds and creating horrors.
It's like the ego and the shadow at play of like, my ego wants this and my shadow says it's not attainable. Therefore, like, I must destroy that. It plays into that so much with, it's like, okay, like, I don't like these people because of XYZ. This is what they achieved. So I'm just gonna like institutionally just make sure that they suffer as a collective. So that's what happened.
Yeah. Well, the Yulenas assert that envy is an intolerable feeling to the ego. And it's because someone or some group represents a type of goodness that the ego doesn't feel like it has.
Yeah.
So it has to destroy it because it's just so intolerable to not have it that it has to be destroyed. And Cinderella is the archetype. It is the fairy tale work and one of the gold standard pieces for how envy shows up. You have this good-hearted, pure ego is just scouring away and trying to clean everything and just clean everything and make it just like Baba Yaga, just to make everything is clean. And she gets hated on. She gets hated on for her goodness.
Yeah. And I think we see that a lot, like generation to generation. And it's like, it happens for so many different cultures as well. I think it's like present for everybody. It's just everybody's so impacted by, and like there's a lot of othering, and I think the othering also stems from envy. And I always say it's like the grass is always greener on the other side. When we are in our lives, we're going to be envious of the opposite. So it's both cultural, collective, and it's also personal. People without kids wish they had kids. People with kids wish they could be single and free and no responsibilities again. It's always the envy is such a crucial part of who we are. And it's like I said before, if it's not attainable, right? It's like, what is the symbolic that you want? Oh, okay. Well, you want freedom. That makes sense. You want to have fun. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things, a primary thing that keeps envy in the shadow is the taboo quality of the process. So it's not as taboo to talk about envying because it indicates a lack on my part. And the fact that I'm doing some psychological work to try to transmute my envy into admiration, as you were tipping your hat to earlier. But it's much more taboo to claim that you are the envied. Because you're somehow asserting that you're great or something like that. So hardly anybody's talking about being envied.
Yeah.
Because it's so taboo, right?
And if we even just, it's a very even I'm like very careful with the words I say because it's such an uncomfortable topic, I think, for a lot of people, no matter if it's Jews or any other culture. It's like, you don't want to seem ethnocentric. You don't want the superiority conflict coming up. But I think everybody has even just a tiny bit of a superiority complex. And it's only because the ego exists in every single one of us. And then the shadow quickly goes in and says, that's not okay. But if we even just talk about like the biblical aspect of like the Israelites, the Jews, the Judeans, like the sons and daughters of Abraham as the quote unquote chosen people, there it is. It's already that envy is starting just from a biblical sense.
I think that the ego was in the collective unconscious, and what's its job?
Mhm.
Its job is to assert its chosenness. I mean, this is archetypal. This is
Mhm.
this is collective unconscious stuff. And even in biology, it shows up that way, that, you know, that oxytocin, the great bonding peptide, obviously it facilitates in-group bonding, not
Mhm.
just a mother and a child or whatever, but in-group bonding, but it enhances out-group aggression.
Mhm.
So
100.
like even from a science perspective, we have this curious thing in the collective unconscious that's like gets us to identify with in-group and then jettison out-group.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's where the cultural complexes arise. It's like splinter psyches within the cultural unconscious.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So then there's scapegoating.
Yes.
So then there's scapegoating, which is, you know, that's archetypal too, right? You know, jettison the impure one that's not in group.
Yeah.
Jettison them because of envy, jettison them because they're not pure enough.
Mhm.
You know, talk to us about scapegoating.
The Jew as a scapegoat is one of the things that I'm going to be writing on. It's in my like table of contents already. The Jew has historically been a scapegoat in every generation. It's easy to blame us as a group for everything that is going wrong with society, and people just take it. And correct me if I'm wrong in this, but like in Europe, Christians were not allowed to lend money. So Jews became bankers. And because they became bankers, they became successful monetarily. So then all of the money problems in Europe were blamed on the Jews. Same thing with like the revolutionaries, the Bolsheviks and the Communist Party, like everything that was going wrong with Soviet society, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was a document that was 100% false, but basically like outlined how the Jews were responsible for all the evil and all the bad things in the Soviet Union. And people believed it because why not?
Mm.
So, and I think we see that in 2025 as well. It's like with the rise of anti-Semitism is so big because all of these like projections and our belief in an ancestral homeland is a controversial topic, and everything that's bad with society is blamed on us as well. And I think that the scapegoating really, like, you're right that to bring it out of envy, because if you are envious and you cannot mend with the envy, it's easy to scapegoat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When even when like people are triggered by something, I always ask, or like, what qualities within you do you see in the other person that you don't like?
Well, this is, you know, one of the reasons why I love archetypal thought is it encourages inquiry about what's the shadow at play in myself?
Mm-hmm.
What's the shadow at play in our species?
Mm-hmm.
What is the stuff that we project onto other groups so that we can maintain our purity?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
scapegoating in a nutshell. So this is where it's like the Jungians and Jungian thought really have something for humanity, because this is where, because it's like my sense is that with you and I, we had the possibility here, give an archetypal framework, a different framework for what's happening over
Mm-hmm.
there in the Holy Land.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you could just give us an archetypal framework, or your version of it, for what is happening over there on maybe on both sides, because this is where the archetypes, come out to play, is in battle and in the horrors of life. That's where the archetypes, where people no longer are people, they become archetypes inside of a human body, like a possession state.
I think that it's two sides of heroes' journeys trying to win.
Yeah.
Right. So, and we can just kind of put all the civilians aside and not speak about the civilians of the Israeli or the Palestinian civilian, but more so talk about like IDF versus Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Actually, so in Singer and Kimball, in their book, one of the chapters actually is kind of about old. I think it's like the 2006, like the prior Intifada, kind of the war over there. They actually talk about an Israeli boy who witnessed a Hamas terrorist murder his father. I think that's the story, or attack his father, and kind of how that invokes this hero journey of like trying to avenge the death. And I think that's what is happening archetypally, is that fundamentally we all want the same thing, which is peace.
Mm-hmm.
That's what everybody wants, but it's this battle towards trying to avenge what happened before. This is not a new conflict. This conflict and it didn't start in 1948. It started way before that. And so it's like just generation upon generation of people attempting to achieve the hero status and to overcompensate and to really try to win this battle that unfortunately I don't think is winnable in this way at all. And I don't know if there is any other way to try and win it on either side.
Jung talks a lot about the battle of the opposites, and I can agree that we want peace. And then there's also this opposing force in the psyche that needs to have revenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you even see this in ancient justice practices, tribal justice practices. You have the phenomenon known as vendetta.
Mm-hmm.
So in order for a tribe to mitigate justice, and you see this, from, the Inuit tribes way up north to the far tip of South America and everywhere in between and across the, all throughout Africa. And vendetta is archetypal.
Yeah.
Revenge is archetypal. I mean, it is there, and it's part of the warrior archetype. And it's the way that one way that the warrior mitigates justice.
Yeah.
But you see in some of these wonderful, imaginative tribal scenarios that there's other ways of mitigating justice. For example, the Inuits, they would do like song jousts
Mm-hmm.
where you would get two wronged parties and they would actually have a singing duel.
Yeah.
And what you have is this extraordinary creative process where within that ritual practice, you have this duel. So you have the warrior is there and it's aggressive. Like they say
Mm-hmm.
mean things and satirical, horrible things, but it's done within this ritual creative context so that
Yeah.
after the ritual is over and a winner has been decided, everybody comes together and has a feast.
Yeah. I guess the governments need to take note.
I mean, hello, it's like there's like this assumption that the tribal imagination is somehow backwards or, not evolved or something like that.
No, but
And
that's the thing, and it's like the revenge and the vendetta. Because this didn't start today, right? It didn't start with you. It is so ancestral, and a lot of American Jews were very confused by why they felt so many emotions and so heavy following the October 7th massacre. A lot of American Jews were very confused, and they realized it's because their genetics, it felt it before. And then the polarization started, and a lot of, instead of coming together as humans, of like, okay, like there is a conflict, there is death, there is war, let's find a way to support each other. A lot of people turned their back on their Jewish friends. And it became two polarizing sides in the United States. So a lot of the clients that come through my door, they lost all of their friends. They don't feel safe at work. Divorces, even over these things. I never thought that my doctoral work about anti-Semitism would be something that would be my clinical work.
Mhm.
I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't anticipating that. I didn't even want that, really. Not because I don't want to work with it, but because I don't want there to be skyrocketing anti-Semitism.
Mhm.
And that's what happens. People are polarized in their belief about what is going on in the Middle East. People from either side, that like Jews who have been here, right? They like have a connection, but there's also a lot of like people who have absolutely no connection to either side that have very strong opinion. And it really ends up like impacting. But I've spoken to people who are objectively on the opposite side of me, and with peaceful conversation, we know what we want.
Well, I mean, heck, you got an evil eye hanging from your wall there. I mean, that's kind of homage right there to Palestine, is it not?
I would say that everybody in the Middle Eastern culture and Eastern European culture believes in the evil eye.
Uh-huh.
That is
certainly like Russians absolutely have a kind of sniffer for envy and evil eye of envy and so on.
Yeah, I would say that it's just sort of like that is something that like, but that's the point, is that like all the cultures, they share so much.
Mhm.
So like you'll see I'm not wearing one right now. I usually do, like a red string bracelet. Like you will see, I even started seeing people from South America wear it. And then when I asked them about it, they're like, yeah, it's for evil eye. And I'm like, I thought it was more of an Eastern European, Middle Eastern thing.
Interesting.
So
yeah, and gosh, just to speak to how fragmented and polarized, that's with the war, Ukraine war, like Ukrainians where I live have kind of stopped speaking Russian.
yes.
There's like, and they kind of started to pay, but there's like this fracturing just around language too. It's like,
Yeah, I know. So I like, my parents are from Ukraine, but I only speak Russian because that's what they grew up with. But yeah, there's like this wave. The Ukrainians are trying to boycott speaking Russian, and it kind of is, but a lot of them didn't grow up speaking Ukrainian either.
Wow. That makes for a really interesting predicament for some Ukrainians, and just interesting predicament, just so fractured, right?
Yeah.
It's not interesting. It's fucking tragic.
Yeah. So there's kind of like a Spanglish version of Russian Ukrainian that is going on for a lot of people. But yeah, for me, hearing the Ukrainian language is like mind-boggling because it sounds exactly like Russian, but like it's like kind of like Pig Latin. The intonation is the same. Some words are the same, but like I cannot understand anything.
Yeah. Well, this has been a really rich discussion. I think we could just keep on going with the archetypal stuff. I just love that. I'm wondering if we could just talk about sun rays. That's what your clinic is called, Sun Ray, correct?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how this intergenerational trauma shows up in the bodies that come into your clinic, and like how you support these bodies in unraveling the trauma and moving forward?
People come into my practice without even knowing that we're going to go there, even though I advertise it. But I think people see like generational trauma, like, oh, okay, oh, well, I don't have much of that. And I ask every single one of my clients to tell me about their grandparents, tell me about their parents. And what I help them do is I help them really connect their stories to the ancestral. And we do that through narrative work. We do that through just discussion of like, well, tell me about this and tell me about that, and making the connections between what is going on in their present self, their emotions, their hardships, their complexes, such as the imposter syndrome or the perfectionism or whatever it may be, and how that is related to the previous generations as well as their upbringing. So definitely touch on some unconscious stuff, but a lot of the things is like, well, what was the messaging that you got? Oh, you're from the South where you were taught to be proper and respectful and always like not talk poorly of other people and like not air dirty laundry. Well, okay. And now you are very much anxious about people finding things out about you or being judged. There's the connection.
Yeah. So if you, let's say, for example, you identify that grandma was a major nexus for family trauma. And like, how do you work with that? I'm aware that it'd be different with different folks and different levels of imagination and history and how much experience do they have in therapy. But if you could maybe pluck out a kind of case study, even if it's your own, but frame it in such a way that you can bring us into an intervention.
Kind of two things come to mind. So I already spoke about that narrative. With narrative, I also, I love to do active imagination.
Can you qualify that for our listeners?
Yes.
What is active imagination?
So active imagination is essentially a more creative mindfulness exercise, to put it in simple terms. And I would say so go to the grandma. Imagine having a dialogue with that grandma.
Gladys Knippenberg, she's here in the room. Folks, what do you do when folks might balk at that? It's active imagine my grandmother in the room. Like what?
I just tell them, I'm like, well, what do you think about mindfulness? Sometimes when people are, so that's actually a perfect segue, because when people are like very much against mindfulness meditation and kind of like the imaginal work, I tell them to do more concrete somatic exercises. So connecting to their ancestors through hobbies and activities. I actually have a reel coming out in a few days or or next week or something, where I am cooking and talking about intergenerational trauma, but basically connecting to your ancestors through doing an activity that they enjoyed. And then you can weave in active imagination with that. So like as you are cooking a cultural food, so I was making capiete. I'm sure you've had capiete before. And, so it's like the same, like that movement of doing, taking the meat, making the patty, putting the breadcrumbs, like that is something that every single woman in my lineage did. So connecting through that and kind of like an imagination exercise that you were doing it besides your ancestor. Or if I dabbled in embroidery for a bit, really been meaning to get back to that. And my great grandmother, she did needlepoint. So as I was doing my embroidery, I could feel my intentionally, right? It's not like a woo-woo thing, but it's more of like I'm intentionally imagining that this is my grandmother's hands. I think there's even a book called My Grandmother's Hands out there.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
I read it like 2 or 3 years ago, but
Resma Menachem.
yeah.
Yeah.
So if you know that your ancestor lived by a lake and you can imagine that they like to go swimming in that lake, like hop into the pool and go swimming. Connect with your ancestors through somatic movement, somatic activities, as well as like engage your inner child. When you were a kid, you imagined a lot of things. So tap into that imagination and imagine having that conversation.
Nice. Or even go on a kind of self-constructed pilgrimage, right? Like where your people are actually from. Go to the villages, weird stuff happens, right? When you get that tingle goosebump response, when we go not, suspending our disbelief.
Yeah.
Because these mysteries are there waiting for us, these mysteries of meaning. And I find, even in somebody that hasn't done that much work and their imagination, let's just say it's a cynic. Let's say we're working with a cynic. Like, for example, recently I was working with this guy. I wouldn't say is necessarily a cynic, but he's most definitely a scientist and a software engineer. And
they don't do well with any of these things.
Yeah. And so, but here we are, he and I are doing active imagination work. And I said, I want you to just come up with a memory of when you felt peaceful in your life. And this man's from India. We ended up being in a village in India, and his grandmother was holding him and singing him a song. And it's just, and it was real for him. He went from bouncing off the walls, anxious with productivity anxiety, to like a tear leaking out the side of his eye, and we're not doing, this is like mediumship work or something like that. Although people with heavily developed imaginations and like a spiritual instinct, we can do work like that too. I'm like family constellation adjacent work, which I'm imagining you have dabbled in, if not dabbled.
Family constellations is on my list of like want to get deeply involved and trained in.
If you can find Vasalaga, I think her name is Vasalaga. She's this great, extraordinary Russian family constellator. And, you can get her details from me offline, but the Russian community is very impressed with her.
Yeah.
And even I have considered going to one of her workshops, which will be translated live into English, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what is it? Let's throw that down for our audience that hasn't heard about family constellations. I can at least introduce it. It's the work of Bert Hellinger. And he actually lived with the Zulu people in Africa. He was actually trained in transactional analysis, which is one of these really interesting paradigms, psychological paradigms, and eventually ended up kind of doing ancestor work with the Zulus
in such a way that he kind of put it in a psychological package for folks. That's
And
modern era.
the ancestors are such a big part of the Zulu culture and tribe. I visited South Africa about 3 years ago, and we actually got to interact with a lot of people from the Zulu tribe. They build hut where their ancestors are buried, and they literally, like, they want a child, they go sleep in that hut. And they pray to the ancestors, and when somebody passes away, they like symbolize them with a stick until a proper burial. Like, the Zulu culture is all about ancestors. When I was over there and listening to the stories, I was just like, wow. It was like as if I was really like meant to be here. It was a really life-changing experience just listening to their stories and listening to their traditions. So yeah, very much
Wow.
love the Zulu tribe and culture.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, that's a interesting enhance connection that you have with the Hellinger tradition. I think that's so cool. Yeah, I honor the tradition. I really like it. I have some theoretical bones to pick with it that I've kind of put in my book a little bit.
Like we all do, right? With all
Right.
the orientation.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's like, when we get right down to it, we are shaped by our history.
We are.
And we're given life from the folks that were our progenitors. Like they came before us and we inherited our life from them. And if you have an imagination, and Jean Houston talks about this in her work, where this is a simple exercise. You can just imagine them standing behind you. Just a simple exercise.
Yeah.
Just imagine your ancestors, your people standing behind you. And there can be just like a 3-minute, like yummy exercise. You feel supported and like you have a backbone because of these folks back behind you.
Yeah. That's what I tell everybody, is to not just channel the intergenerational trauma, but channel the intergenerational resilience.
Channel the intergenerational resilience. I think you should do a reel about that, Karen.
I might.
Yeah, for reals. Channel your intergenerational resilience. Yeah, for sure. And the love. What about the all those loves and losses back there?
Yeah.
And that force of bringing through the spark of life. And yeah.
We are here because our ancestors made it. No matter where they were or what they experienced, we are here because they are the lineage of survivors.
Yeah, I think in a way we have a duty to make things better.
And there you go. There's the cycle, right? To make things better, there's the overcompensation. I have to prove myself. I have to. You see these? Do you see just how it?
Cycles? Sure, absolutely. There's the force of the ego and the shadow there. We have to do things better to survive. And the one that I'm offering is more of a duty of the heart to make life better for all. It's kind of like a.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, life's better for all, and I think is why we do this work, and why, as wounded healers, we show up every day and witness the pain and the healing of others.
Yeah, wounded healers. Yeah, Michael Meade has this interesting phrase where he draws from the French, I believe, where the word for wound in French, I wish I knew exactly what it is, but it's close to the word blessing. The wound is where the blessing is. Certainly is the case for me, like where I'm the most wounded and the most vulnerable is where is where I find this mystery and this paradoxical power. Where I'm the most vulnerable is where I find my real power.
Yeah. It makes perfect sense because our vulnerability, the vulnerability is a strength within itself. Vulnerability leads to connection. Vulnerability leads us to empathy.
Mhm.
But I think so many people are afraid to go there. Many people are afraid to.
Yeah. Well, and that's the case. The Russian speakers that I work with, there's an extra layer of that because,
Mhm.
if you're powerful, that black car might be driving up the next, right? That
Yeah,
next morning, that black car could be driving up if you show up as, brilliant and smart and everything, they're coming for you.
yeah.
So,
And I think that, like, when we spoke about evil eye, like, even like you saying like black car, I know what you meant, like maybe like the Communist Party coming and the KGB coming and taking them away. But also, like, I think this symbolically, like, black car could also mean like just like extermination and evil eye and the dark force, like taking everything away.
yeah, so that's the other side of the paradox is that vulnerability is power and real power is vulnerable.
Yeah.
How can folks find you, Karen?
Well, first you can Google my name. If you do Google me, do put my middle name as well, or just put LMFT and I should show up. So if you look me up, Karen Goldenberg, LMFT, Keren. But you can also easily look me up using sunraypsychotherapy.com.
Sounds good, Karen. Well, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure. And yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing more of your podcasts. And I made note of your plug. I'm going to listen to Loretta's podcast as well. I'm intrigued now, so very
Nice.
much excited. Thank you again.
Thank you for listening to the Boundless Body Podcast. Please like us, share, subscribe, and until next time, stabilize, catalyze, and thrive